My name is Evelyn Sanchez Gonzalez. I'm a third-year law student at UCLA Law, and I'll just be assisting with the logistical aspects of this session. You will see you have some index cards. Feel free to write questions throughout the session as they pop up. We're going to collect the index cards around 2:50 or toward the end of the session. So you will get the opportunity to ask questions. And also regarding CLE credits, you can go downstairs in case you have not already grabbed the documents for that. So yeah, this panel is called Latina Futures, so increasing access to law and justice for Latinas. Thank you so much for being here today. We're very excited to hear what our amazing panelists have to say on this matter, and you as well. Our moderator's name is Alicia Alvarez. She is a professor of law at University of Illinois, Chicago. Now we'll pass the microphone to Professor.
Thank you. So welcome, everyone. It's my pleasure to serve as the moderator for today's panel. We have a fabulous group of participants, and I'll just briefly introduce them. And the panel, I'll say just a few words. The panel has representatives from different aspects of legal service delivery system. And our role, our goal is to engage in a conversation about what our roles as facilitators of justice and what the challenge is for us as we re-envision the current legal service delivery model. So our first panelist is Betty Balli Torres, who is the Executive Director of the Texas Access to Justice Foundation. And I'm going to be presenting them in the order that, sort of to my left. Next is Luz Herrera, who is a professor of law and associate dean for experiential education at Texas A&M University School of Law. Our next presenter is Silvia Argueta, who's the executive director of Legal Aid Foundation of LA. And last but not least is Alicia Sanchez, who's a supervising attorney with the Bronx Defender. As I said, I'm gonna ask them a series of questions, and then we'll turn to you for the questions that you can write in the index cards that you have. So I'm gonna start out with Betty, and is it okay if I call you by your first name?
Oh, absolutely. That's absolutely.
Sorry. So how do you think the current model of legal service delivery advances the needs of Latinx communities? And where would you say that there's room for improvement?
I think one thing that's really important to keep in mind is that the current justice system, which is created way before any of us were here, was created by lawyers for lawyers. And frankly, there was probably not a person of color in the room at the time that our current justice system was created. And that particularly matters. And so one of the things that I've observed, and I've been involved in the legal services delivery system for quite some time, is that there is a real desire to keep the status quo, and which makes it a real challenge for many of us who really see that there needs to be significant change if we are going to change the delivery system. And so what has happened is generation after generation after generation of lawyers have continued to keep the status quo, and most of us have not been at the table. And not only have we not been at the table, we are not leading any of the tables, and so the system doesn't change. And so it makes it a real challenge for us to see transformation. One of the, I think one of the most important cases this year is the 75th anniversary of the Hernandez case, and that is really the first case where the U.S. Supreme Court dealt with the issue of Mexican Americans and that there were Mexican American lawyers presenting at the U.S. Supreme Court. And there is a documentary that each of you needs to write down, you need to see. It's about 50 minutes, it's a class apart. And it is, it's really shocking because one of the things that those lawyers had to do was to educate the U.S. Supreme Court as to what Mexican Americans are. They had no idea who Mexican Americans were. They were asking questions about this because this was foreign to them. So just 75 years ago, we weren't even a thought in the mind of the U.S. Supreme Court. And so you kind of fast forward and you listen this morning to the Chief Justice, and she said it had been, 172 years since before there was a Latina Chief Justice here in the state of California. 173 years since there was a Chief Justice. And so it goes back to what I just said, is that if we're not even at the table, and if we're not at the table, then we don't have input. But if we don't even get to lead, then we really don't have input. And so it's really inspiring to me to hear her this morning talk about leading and talk about access to justice and the things that she was looking at. And so as a result, we don't necessarily, our court systems don't think of Latinos. And some of it's benign. You can't think of what you don't know and what you aren't. And so we finally, I think, are at a position where you see Latina judges and state reps. We have one in the room. We see people leading. And so as a result, we can make changes that are important to be able to provide services in the Latino community. And obviously the one that just comes to mind, and I'll just use as an example, is language access. We talked about it this morning. And so you don't think about language if language isn't an issue for you or your family. I mean, it's just, again, it's benign. And sometimes it's not benign. And as a result, the Department of Justice has to go into communities and sue them to ensure that there's appropriate translation for communities of colors, not just Spanish, but other languages. And so I think what I think about the system is it does not work for low-income people right now. And I will give you one number that is shocking. 8% of the civil legal needs of poor Americans are being met. I said are being met. That means 92% are not being met, which is basically we are not meeting the civil legal needs of poor Americans. And when you look at poor Americans, there is a huge number, in Texas, a particularly large number, California, a particularly large number of Latinos whose needs are not being met. And so we really need to rethink our delivery system. We need to rethink our court system. And we need to think of it so that it includes all of us in the room, and so that we can be in the room to reimagine what a court system could look like when all the voices are included, and that we're able to really fully represent our Latino community.
Thank you. Silvia, I'm going to turn to you and see if you can help us sort of move the conversation along. If there were one policy reform or advancement that you would make or that you think is necessary to increase access to law and justice, what do you think that would be?
Well, I wish I had a magic wand, and I also wish that I would follow instructions, because I'm not going to give you one. I'm going to have to give you two.
Oh, good.
But to my dear younger generation people in the room, that's how you should be. Don't follow the rules. So here we go. following up on what Betty was talking about, and I'll get to the second one in a minute, it is about access for our communities. And I think one of the biggest barriers, and one thing that if I could change would be having our community know about our services. You have no idea how often people say, I didn't know legal services existed. And if you don't know that we exist and that you can come to us with your legal problems, you're not going to get help. The door to that courthouse is closed to you because you don't know how to access that system. And we don't do a good job, period, of getting the support that we need to get the word out there. We're making some inroads and working with government, but it has taken monumental efforts to ensure that our communities, Latinx and others, are aware of our services, are aware that they have rights. So I'll give you what happens when you don't know. People get evicted, they lose their children, they get deported. In Los Angeles, we started a program called Stay Housed LA 2 years ago. It's a joint program with 10 legal services providers, 16 community-based organizations, the County of Los Angeles, the cities of Los Angeles and Long Beach. Last year, we had an outreach event every single day. Last year, we prevented more than 25,000 people from being evicted. Why? Because they knew their rights. When I talk to tenants, I'll tell them, un inquilino informado es un inquilino con poder. They don't know their rights. They will never make it to our doors. So the numbers that Betty told you about, those are the people who walked into our offices and couldn't get the full array of help that we can give them. They come in with housing issues, but it was caused because they lost their job, so there's an employment issue, and then they have domestic violence in the home. We sometimes can only help with one of those because we don't have enough lawyers. But more importantly, who isn't coming to our doors? And I think that's the one thing I would change is how do we, as a collective group in society, and especially in the legal world, ensure that clients, that our communities know about our services, know that they can get help, so that they don't just go to notarios, who are, in essence, putting them on the path to deportation, or not helping them not lose their children, or not allowing them to stay in their housing. Because we trust notarios, right? Because in Latin America, notarios are lawyers, not in the US. Or they trust their vecino, which is even worse, because the vecino said this, right? And so that's the one thing that I would think about changing, because access is that important. And you can't have access to that courthouse door if you have no knowledge. So if I had a magic wand, I'd get our services out there in billboards and whatnot. And we try, trust me. We have PSAs at 1 a.m. I don't know who's watching those, but that's the only thing we could get. People tell me that my organization is the best kept secret in town and think that's a compliment. It is not. It's like I look at it and go, fail. I failed to get the word out. But I also want to say that when you act in concert, not just with legal services organizations, but as I mentioned, our community-based organizations, you change the narrative. They change the narrative. The reason we were able to do an outreach and education event 365 days last year, they were the ones pushing that forward, teaching people, going door to door to make sure that people showed up for those workshops. We can't do it alone. And in law, a lot of times lawyers think we can do it all alone, and we can't. We simply cannot. We're not able to. Communities demand more and need more. My second one that I'm going to cheat about is about you, about folks who want to get into the legal profession. I think if I could change anything about how we serve people, I would change who the lawyers that serve them look like. Most of our organizations do not have lawyers that look like the people we serve. And I'm going to brag a bit. Mine does, because we've made a concerted effort. I have 225 employees, 89 of them are Latinx. That's on purpose. My management team is incredibly diverse in all of the ways that you can imagine, not just Latinx, African American, LGBTQIA, Asian Americans, you name it. Language diversity. My staff speaks 18 languages, goes to Betty's point. We serve people in the languages that they come to, from Hmong to Spanish to Tagalog, you name it, we use those languages and help them. And this is the staff, not the interpretation services. So that matters. But the problem is that some of you who want to go to law school, there are barriers, right? The LSAT. Hate the LSAT. The LSAT creates barriers because it costs money. The prep courses cost money. You don't know how to handle that LSAT, and that's what you're being guided by. There are only, in the United States, 2% of all the lawyers in the United States are Latinas. That's just complete BS. In California, we are 35%, it rose a little. In California, as of 2022, there were 36% of the population is Latinx. Only 6% are lawyers. And they didn't even break it down to Latinas. Those are barriers. I am very grateful that my staff is as diverse as it is because our clients at LAFLA, 38% of them are Latinx. So they get to see a lot of people that look like them helping them. And they're surprised. You know, half the time when I was an attorney practicing at LAFLA, they were like, so where's the lawyer? ¿Dónde está la abogada? And I'm like, yo soy la abogada. But I get it. Don't you get it? I mean, because they're not used to that. So we need to change what the makeup of the legal profession looks like, and we're making some inroads, thanks to folks like Betty, to the Hispanic National Bar Association, to others. But we need to make those inroads because there's simply not enough of us. And now with the challenges that affirmative action has brought, there are a lot of concerns regarding that. But that shouldn't stop us from changing what the legal profession looks like. There are people helping here. I have to give a shout out to Cindy Lopez, who's a former Deputy Attorney General here in Los Angeles in the state of California. She started a legal education and access program that helps people with the LSAT, the entire application process. She is amazing, and she should be here speaking about this. And those are the people who create opportunities for others to advance. Another issue for advancing our profession is the provisionally licensed lawyer program that came to be in California because of the pandemic. So it was an apprenticeship program. It is now in many ways sunsetted because you cannot apply to it anymore. You graduate from law school, you don't have to take the bar exam. You get to practice in a legal aid office, in a for-profit office, at a law firm, and you get the experience. That's what we need permanently. But the 69% of lawyers who are Caucasian, who are white Caucasian, oppose this program because it's a threat to them. Because most of the people taking advantage of PLLs were people of color. That's what I would change, is our access as a community and our clients' ability to know what we do and how we do it and how they can get access to that courthouse door.
Thanks, Luz. I'm going to turn it over to you, Luz, and sort of follow up with some of Silvia's point about access, right? In terms of access, people who are interested in the law having access to legal education. So, what career advice would you give to a lawyer, to a law student who's interested in legal access work?
Well, I tell him to go apply for a job here with Silvia, 'cause she's going to give him one. No, seriously, I think I'd ask them about their commitment to being resilient, because I think a career and access to justice requires determination, resilience, and you've got to kind of keep trying. It's not an easy path. I'd also say that they should not look at what's already there as a solution for what might quench their thirst for what they're trying to do, right? Because there are limited jobs in legal access in terms of traditional structures. Very few lawyers work in the public interest realm. Very few lawyers work as public defenders or government lawyers. And so my path was a little bit different. I created my own practice, and it was in the private sector, but also created a nonprofit to continue that work. And so sometimes what we're looking for isn't always there. I also think that it's important for us, and I'm going to pick up on both themes that both of you brought up, that really talk about what do we need to provide our communities to really be able to be responsive. So, I know notarios have done some bad things, but I also know that those are the people that our communities trust. So why aren't we figuring out how to educate them, equip them, and be able to make them part of a larger legal service delivery system that incorporates the people in their networks to be able to get the services they need? So we have to think more broadly about the law and about the players in the law. I don't think we'll ever have enough lawyers to address the legal needs in our communities. And so we really need to think about organizations and structures and develop a new model that helps address the legal needs in our communities. Now, we've done that in areas that are, federal agency and state agency, right? You have BIA accredited organizations that help on immigration. You have, what are they called? Tax agents, right? There's folks that do enrolled agents that help with IRS issues and dispute resolution. So we have to really make use of those non-lawyer allies that are already there, but also think about figuring out what communities are already using and how do we make sure that they're providing competent representation and doing so legally, right? And figure out what aspects of the pie we want to divide up. Because we can't just say, okay, well, we're going to have more lawyers go through law school. I mean, I work in law schools. I'd love to see more Latinos in law schools. But I know that that's not going to always address the end game, which is ultimately providing more services to our community. But I would ask them about resilience. I'd also ask them, if I'm advising someone, I'm going into this field. I've asked them if they have a strong personal board of directors. And a personal board of directors, each of us is a corporation. We're an entity, right? And we have to have people around us that keep us, one, accountable, but also kind of remind us to, smell the flowers sometimes. Because the work that is involved with direct legal service delivery can be very challenging on an emotional level and a psychological level. And so you need to be able to surround yourself with individuals that will keep you sane and will keep you accountable to yourself, right? So I think those are the two things, but I think overall, just make sure that you try what's out there. You go ask Silvia for a job because she has some and she's gonna hire you.
I sure do.
And so, and if that doesn't work, don't give up because there's a path and you're the first person to go to the law with your experience. So if the law is missing something or not providing a service to a population that you think is important, then it's probably your job to create it.
Thank you. So Alicia, I want to pick up on Luz's smell the flowers analogy and ask you, like, what advice do you have? How do you practice self-care in a work environment where you're constantly problem solver for other people's legal issues? And I think your practice area and your previous practice area are both really good examples. It's not just the problem solving for other people's legal issues. It's when you're finding people in really serious situations where their liberty and family and other issues are at stake.
Yes, thank you. I mean, certainly I hear what Luz says about how difficult it is to do this work. Right now I represent people in criminal court facing the most serious type of criminal charges, and I've in the past done deportation defense, direct representation, so like client-on-client work. And, I want to say we're perfectionists, right? We want to say we're really good at our job, and we're also really good at balancing things, and I have like really good work-life balance, and my mental health is like right here. But the reality is that when we do this work because of our values, right? When you choose your career, not just to have the life you want to have, but because of who you want to stand with and for, your identity and your community becomes really enmeshed with your job. And so leaving the office doesn't mean you leave that behind and you're able to just go to a movie or read a book and not think about the harm that you've witnessed day in and day out to the people that you grow to really care about and to be, assigned the honor of representing. So recognizing, I think for me, it's been really important coming to terms with the fact that I am a cog in this racist horrible system that causes harm to our people. And I'm a cog that sticks out and creates friction and slows it down and tries to stop the harm, but I'm in it. And it means that, I can say I'm an abolitionist, but at the end of the day, I'm telling people to take a plea to go to prison, right? I can say that I don't believe in the immigration system that we have, but at the end of the day, I've had advised clients, like, you can stay and fight, but you're gonna be in immigration detention for 2 years fighting this case, and you don't have a legal option, so maybe accept voluntary departure, right? And so acknowledging that and knowing that you're going to see the harm and you're not gonna be able to stop the harm a lot of the times. Maybe you mitigate it a little bit, but you won't be able to stop it. And that's not where you have to put your value. It has to be in the fact that you stood next to someone, you witnessed what they were going through, you make it so that they were not alone, and you did everything you could. And if you did everything you could, then you have to be able to sleep at night. And it's hard when it's our communities who are experiencing the harm, and you have to live with that. But our people need us. This legal system needs people like us to stop it, to slow it down, to maybe even make it better. So at the end of the day, I think it's worth it to take that acknowledgement of harm and not put it solely on your shoulders.
So I'm going to keep picking on you, Alicia. And I think picking up on some of those themes, right, of, that to some extent, the work can be hard, right? So what can you share with our audience, especially the students who might be interested in doing policy work and thinking about policy work versus what I would call direct legal services? And to some extent, I also don't want to sort of think about it as an either other, but either one or the other, because I think that there are opportunities to do both. But in terms of thinking about having to choose and maybe choosing a first job, sort of what ideas do you have?
Yeah, I mean, I do recognize that you can certainly do both, or they inform each other. Like the Bronx Defenders, we have a policy office, and they talk to direct advocates about what we think are the changes that we need to be advocating for, and we talk to them about the issues we think they need to focus on for the next sessions. I think you just really kind of have to do a little bit of each. I went to law school thinking I was going to be in the policy kind of, or maybe impact litigation track, because I hated public speaking. Like, being cold called in class was torture. Day in, day out, I hated it. And so the idea of being a trial attorney where every day of the week I'm standing up in court and arguing orally would have, melted me in a puddle. I never thought that I would do it. But I did an internship and I did a clinic, and it just really, just by doing it and seeing what it's like the day-to-day of your experience. Because ultimately there's so many ways to increase access to justice for our communities, right? There's so many types of work that you can do with that value in mind. But you kind of have to think about your day-to-day and what gives you energy and what's going to be something that's maybe, like, I have a friend who hates confrontation, and so she just couldn't be a public defender for too long because she had to fight with DAs every day of her life and with judges and with clients. So kind of thinking about your personality and what is something that maybe it's a fear that you can overcome, and what is something that's just not gonna be comfortable or not gonna make you happy. So I highly, highly think clinics, externships, internships, any way you can have some underground experience, and also reaching out to people that you either went to your law school or are Latina attorneys and you're interested in many people shadow me and they just email me coldly and say, hey, can I come? And they come to court with me and see what the day is like, and then you get a sense of if that's something that you're interested in, or if maybe you want to take a different path.
Thanks. I want to, if folks have questions, please write them down, but we still have a little bit of time before we get there. So maybe I'll circle back to the rest of the panel, since we have time, on some of the, I think what I would say are some of the critical questions, and I'll start with, the first question about, or maybe the second question, that Silvia was talking about, how do we get, so there are services available, limited, but there are services, and how do we get the word out to people about what the services that are available to them and the rights that they have. Other ideas that the other panelists may have.
I'll take a stab at it. I mean, some of the research on legal access shows that individuals don't think of their problems as legal issues, right? And so that it often takes an intermediary to explain to them, oh, you have this problem. Have you thought about talking with a lawyer? Have you thought about going to the self-help center? Have you thought about, and those intermediaries are oftentimes community leaders, members of the church, school counselors, right? So really individuals that are embedded in the communities where people are experiencing the problems. And so I think, going back to Betty's point, that a lot of the legal services design is really, by lawyers for lawyers. We have to redesign our legal services system to think about putting the legal service consumer, which is what I call someone who doesn't have a client, because most people that interact with the legal systems are not clients of any lawyers, they're doing it on their own. We have to put the legal consumer at the center of the design, and then work around that. So that does put lawyers not kind of at the center of the whole legal system. It puts us in some sector of it, but that's the only way I think that we can increase access to legal services. So I think that's important. I think it's also important because then we go beyond just thinking about a legal service delivery system that is set up to address only low-income individuals. Because we know that people, particularly people in our community, go in and out of poverty. People might be, poor 1 month and the next month they're doing okay. We also know that a lot of our families are very large, and so household income can put us beyond the low-income category. And so we need to be able to be more expansive in how we think about legal services to account for the realities of the people we're serving, in my opinion.
If I could add to that, I mean, one of the things that I have seen that has been very effective, you've seen it in the colonias in Texas, are promotoras. And so they are out knocking on doors. So you really are, back to what you're saying, it's not necessarily the lawyers, because people aren't seeing their issue as a legal issue. What they know is that their electricity got cut off, but they don't think, oh, I need a lawyer. They know that they're not getting the special education services that their child needs, but they don't see that as a legal issue. And so you start there. Those are life problems that they have. And the studies and the research also shows is that you have kind of cascading problems. And so if you lose your job, it is you move on to, you can't pay your rent, they cut off your utilities, next thing you know, you've got domestic violence, you've got this cascade of problems that happens as well. But in the end, part of the challenge here is, so if we do all this outreach to bring in all these people that they're going to turn away eventually because they are not going to be able to meet those needs. 8%. If they would meet 10, if they could, 20, 25, but the resources aren't there. And so that is so much of the challenge of the delivery system. The delivery system should have forms in Spanish. They should have easy forms that you can go in and represent yourself. You shouldn't have to need a lawyer. The laws should be simple for you. You should be able to, again, reimagine it with the community in mind, not lawyers in mind. And so that's fundamentally, there is something wrong with the system. I have spent my career in access to justice, I'm a legal aid lawyer, director of a legal aid program, and I will, and so my heart and soul is in this. And, but in the end, I know that the system is ineffective ultimately when you can't meet the demand. And so there are so many bright minds, and there are just new generations with new perspectives coming in, and to be able to say, why do we do it this way? Why do we have to do it this way? Is there a better way? And again, it goes back to what I was saying about the status quo, that is often the system kind of just melts into the status quo very often when there is, potential. There's obviously we can change. it's the will to make it happen.
Yeah, and I think a recognition of how these systems are all enmeshed and bring each other about, right? So we have the right to an attorney in a criminal proceeding because we've decided that as a country, right? Or the Supreme Court has decided that if we're going to take away your liberty, you're entitled to an attorney. But you get arrested, and that just doesn't mean you're just dealing with your potential loss of liberty. It means that children's services can come and try and take your children away. And it means that immigration can suddenly decide, even if you have legal status here, that that arrest means that you might lose your status. And if you don't have status, that may put you in their eyes so that suddenly you're detained and in deportation proceedings. You might live in government housing or receive some sort of assistance, and now, because the arrest is related to, let's say, drugs, they're evicting you. And, we at the Bronx Defenders have these areas are, it's holistic defense, so we have attorneys for all these areas for whatever your arrest is. But that should really be expanded, I think, nationwide, because we should recognize that the right to your kids, the right to be in this country, the right to your home are just as important as your right to liberty. And it all comes down to funding and to understanding that our people matter and that they should have somebody, that it should be more accessible. They should be able to themselves participate in these systems, but if not, they should have the right to somebody in every single one of these situations.
Democracy should be accessible.
Exactly. And if I may, I think there are, in the legal system, there are nascent attempts to change that dynamic. We have these things called medical legal partnerships, where the doctors and nurses and health personnel at clinics and hospitals have become the advocates, because Luz talked about, who do you trust? People trust their doctor. People trust their nurse. So folks are showing up to hospitals and clinics, and now we have these partnerships where legal services staff are embedded at those clinics, at those hospitals, and it's the doctors and nurses and other health personnel who are being trained to spot the issue. Because lawyers are very unwilling to give up their power. And yet we've gone in and trained, and not just here in Los Angeles, but throughout the nation. This started on the East Coast in Boston, where this has now become something that most legal aid programs are either practicing or about to start practicing, because who do you trust? I agree with Luz. Who do you trust? I have a whole beef about notarios, so we can disagree about that. A whole beef about them, because we've seen the damage they do. But I also want to embed in this conversation that sometimes people want to say we can use, community workers are something that in the Alaska program, legal services, they're using. It is a fascinating program that is tied to the legal aid organization. But these are the people who, again, are the trusted people in that community. But I also want to make sure, and I'd be remiss to say, the problems that poor people come to us, they are complex. And we cannot come up with simple answers to say, well, we'll train X, Y, and Z person and they'll take care of it. They'll take care of the simple issue. But when it gets hard, they're still back at our doorstep because somebody couldn't help them. And so and it's something that, we're grappling here in California. Next week, I'm at another panel on paraprofessionals. And I think I've become the spokesperson for the legal services community that goes, not until we vet this carefully. And so I have these two Stanford professors who fight with me all the time. And that's why they invited me to the panel, because they know that I'm going to be the nemesis in the room, saying, wait a second, why do you think poor people deserve less justice? Because that's what it is to me. They don't deserve less justice. Can we bring other folks to help us and train them, like we do the doctors, the nurses, the promotoras? Yes, we can. But let's not fool ourselves that people have complex issues. As Betty mentioned, 92% of the people that show up with more than one legal problem do not get the assistance they need. We don't have the resources. And I'd be remiss on this panel to not say, yes, funding and money is going to help us hire more people. Our salaries in legal services are crap. They just are. As an executive director that sits here, that has a staff, we need to do better. Our staff, as I was commenting earlier to Alicia, they're being taken by the government agencies, whether it's public defense, the city attorney, county council, whomever, because they pay more. City attorney pays in Los Angeles $91,000. My starting salary is $74,000. Where do you think you're going to go when you have such huge debt from law school? Or how soon will you leave me? So that's my challenge. As a unionized program, and me as the former union leader who's now the executive director there, my job is to change that dynamic and raise those salaries. Because that's the way we keep you in public interest law. We keep our lawyers. But we're not going to be able to do that if we don't get the funding. And that's the big if, because that's, there's only, we say there's a pie, right? And we're getting the crumbs. Since 1994, the Legal Services Corporation, which funds 134 legal aid programs in the nation, they got $400 million from Congress. Last year, they got $560 million. That's absurd for 134 programs. We don't have enough money to hire more lawyers, more paralegals, more caseworkers. We need to do better, absolutely. But I also want to make, once again, poor people have complex problems, and sometimes it is that lawyer who's going to solve it. We will work with the community workers, the notarios, if we have to. But let's not fool ourselves that it is not an easy job. As I tell my staff, as I tell others who listen to me, this is hard work. It is not for the faint of heart. Access to justice is difficult, but we have to make some inroads because the legal community as a whole, it has not been solving it. And my last dig will be at the pro bonos. Pro bonos are awesome, but they're not taking enough cases and they need to do better because it's their responsibility when they took that oath to become a lawyer.
So maybe in the last few minutes that we have, I sort of want to give an opportunity to the panel to see. I think as we're seeing, this is complex, right? And so, but if we think about how the different parts of the system might be able to work, and so we've talked about, Luz talked about the extent the accredited representatives in the immigration field do incredible work. And I've met accredited reps who I actually thought were lawyers for years. I assumed they were lawyers until I was corrected. And even my own experience when I started in legal services, the paralegals in my office, had a lot to teach me, I'm going to say, about Social Security and public benefits, because they knew 10 times more than I did, even, as a second-year lawyer. And so kind of what a triage model might look like, and maybe triage isn't, because the question is, how do we decide what we could, what needs to be handled by a lawyer, what could be handled by someone else, even if those positions don't exist right now. I mean, we have the example of Washington State trying the limited, whatever, I can never remember.
Licensed technicians.
Right. And they stopped that. And so what might be some ideas for creating a model, a triage model, where others could handle some things and lawyers handle the things that need to be handled by lawyers? Because I agree with Silvia that I think that poor people don't deserve less than others may.
Is that a question for the panel?
For the panel.
Yeah, I don't think anybody on this panel thinks that poor people should deserve less justice than anybody else. But I also think it's important for us to be practical about what exists and how long it takes to change it when we're not in charge. Which is why my kind of initial plug was, if it's not serving the folks you want to serve, you need to sometimes create a different model, because it's not going to fit with what's already there. And so, I think, what I've thought through, and I don't have this all worked out, but I think, is it a nonprofit model or a for-profit model where you have attorneys who are supervising, and you have that in the PI and other contexts, right? You have folks that are supervising and setting standards for certain work, but that you're dividing the work. Okay, if this is the kind of case that somebody has, you do have to triage it. So make sure, we do that when we're screening for citizenship applications, for example. If anybody has any background, any arrest, anything that's a criminal issue, send them to go talk to the attorney. Naleo's not going to fill out the form, or whoever the organization is, right? And so I think we can do that in different areas of law. It does mean that we have to kind of sit and think through every area of law and see what's available and what we can do. But we have law offices that are already doing that. It's just not systemic, right? We haven't figured out how to create a standard and a systemic way of addressing it, and how to make a viable business model for an attorney to go out and go make a successful, do a successful practice. Some of my thoughts on this do have to do with kind of my own experience and research, but also I spend about a year and a half doing focus groups and talking to individuals in the Rio Grande Valley, which is like 90-some% Latino, right? It's the only part of the country that I felt like I could get a good sample of like rural, non-rural individuals that could give me some feedback. And they said, when I went there, and the numbers, by the way, in terms of the number of lawyers compared to individuals, people living there, the population, it's, there's way less lawyers there than other parts of the state, except for other rural pockets. And they said, we have enough lawyers. Look at, you drive through the freeway, and there's billboards everywhere. They're all personal injury lawyers. But when I have a problem with the employment rights issue, when I have a problem with family law and I don't have the money to keep paying someone $300 an hour or more, that's the kind of lawyers we need. So they were saying, we do have all these lawyers, they're not serving our needs, right? So we have to be able to think about how do we make the legal profession more relevant to those folks who feel that we're not serving them. And so that might be, relationships with other people that are already there. The promotoras were a big part of the input from that community, but I do think we have to rethink our whole system. And it's not gonna happen on a system-wide level, it's gonna happen on a community level. So I encourage you all to try different things that might work in your communities, and obviously have, madrinas and padrinos like the folks represented up in this panel.
Thanks. So I think we're ready for questions. I could tell people were writing, so I.
And our other Alicia also is a legal service provider, even though she hasn't said a whole lot.
She is. Okay. Okay. So I was trying to, sort of put some together, and okay, maybe I'll do them this way. So there are a couple about law students, sort of becoming lawyers. And maybe I'll ask both of them and folks can answer. If we're talking about access, how can we educate Latinas thinking about law school or who are in law school when it comes to student loans? And then another sort of student question is, becoming an attorney as a Latina is super important, but no one talks about how isolating that experience is. What advice can you give students to keep going? So maybe I'll give you an opportunity to respond.
I completely agree on the isolation part. And so the best thing you can do is build a network. I promise you, every Latina that has come before you wants to help you. Every single one of us wants to help you. And so part of it is just, it's incumbent upon you to reach out, is to reach out to, you go to a panel like you do today, is to reach out to people on the panel and say, I'd like to learn more, I'd like to do more, what can I learn about this? That's one. Reach out to us. We want to help. Two, become involved. Become involved. Get in your local young lawyer association, get HNBA or Hispanic Bar, whatever there is in your community, become involved in it, and you will immediately have a network of Latinas who either feel the same way you do and just haven't said anything, or are able to help you. I know in Austin we have cafecitos, and you go to any community, there's something like that, and that's I think, the best thing that you can do for yourself. And I think, again, it said something about student loans as well. In many public interest jobs, not all, there's student loan repayment. And I know, for example, our foundation, one of the things that we do is we provide $500 a month for every lawyer who goes to work at legal aid. And so if you're in Texas and you're going to go work for a legal aid program, one of 37, there'll be $500 a month. I realize that doesn't necessarily pay all the debt, and maybe sometimes not even close to it, but there is that opportunity. And so look at very closely the public interest loan forgiveness program as well, because that's an opportunity to work in public interest and have your debt, I guess, really at that point canceled after 10 years. It's complicated, but trust me, there are people who are experts at it and can help make it happen.
There's also income-based repayment plans, and you do have to make sacrifices. I mean, if you're gonna be a legal service delivery lawyer or public interest lawyer, you're making a different choice. You're making a different choice than someone who's going to come out of law school. Some people are earning like 180 or something. What's the starting salary?
No,
in some
200 and
schools?
something.
Oh yeah, see, I mean, I don't even know. I'm out of touch.
Your year is behind.
I know. It's like a lot of money. So you're not gonna. I mean, I'll just talk from my own experience when I was in the situation that some of you might be in. But I graduated, and a lot of my friends were making a lot of money. It wasn't 200 plus, but it was still a lot. And I wasn't making that kind of money. So I lived with my parents. For some of you, that might be an option. For others of you, it's not. But I didn't buy a new car. I bought a used car. I mean, there's going to be things that you have to do that are different. I ended up refinancing my loans over 30 years. I saw my education as a investment that I would have made as if I was purchasing a home. And I only paid off my loans in 2019. Because I made that decision, okay? So it's not for everybody, and I tell people that it's not for everybody. So, and sometimes, like the public interest, the 10-year, some folks find that works for them, and other folks say, I feel handcuffed, I feel tied, I don't want to do it. And it's a reality. So it's also okay if you're committed to public interest. Do public interest as long as you can afford to. And there are other ways to give back if you can't afford to. I remember feeling a little bit resentful about my friends that could afford to do public interest right out of law school because they had a safety net, right? They had parents who subsidized their living. I didn't have that. I had to subsidize my parents' living. So it was a little bit different. And so you make choices based on what makes you happy and what you're able to do for yourself and your family. But it's the student debt is a real issue. It's not just the cost of law school. I think a lot of it has to do with how it's financed. Because when I was financing my student loans, it was like 5%. I had loans at 3%. And none of you could do that anymore. Those are not available. And I think that's a lot of the problem as well, in addition to the rise of cost of legal education. But the financing schemes are really off the charts, in my opinion.
And as to just the aspect of how isolating it is, I think part of it is because we're disrupting a space that wasn't created for us, right? And I think it can make you feel like it wants you to be small, and you can shrink within yourself because of an environment that doesn't accept you, doesn't want you there. I had a friend in law school who told me, we're freaking unicorns. Like, how many Latinas are in law school, right? Like, you're so special, you're so incredible for making it there. And turning it almost kind of to anger, like, I'm gonna show that I deserve to be here more than any of you, because I don't know if you were in my situation, if you would have made it here, right? And just recognizing it's legit that you feel isolated because it's a space that's not meant for you, but you can make it for you by finding your people and by showing that more than anyone, you deserve to be there.
I think our ethical obligations also make it isolating.
I think it does. I mean, but you can find mentors and I don't mean mentors just at work, but outside in anything that you've done, people who will support you through the process, because it is isolating. It's a difficult profession. You walk into a courtroom, you are usually the only Latina in that room. And people are looking at you like, what are you doing here? But there are good people out there. A lot, as Betty said, any one of us would mentor any one of you because we want to move you forward. And I think we sometimes forget that. And as you've gone along in whatever jobs you've had, I bet you've had a mentor that you may not really realize that's the person cheering you on, even if they're not a lawyer. You don't need to have a lawyer to be the mentor. There are so many other people in your life that can do that for you. And yeah, student loans and all that is really, really hard. And one thing that I get asked a lot at interviews from people who have not been in public interest, who've gone to big law, is, are you even going to consider me? And I'm like, I wouldn't be interviewing you if I weren't. So it's okay to go to earn other money, pay off some of that student debt before joining us, as long as you show us that you have a commitment to the work that we're doing. And I think sometimes people default to, if I don't get in right away after law school, they're not going to think that I'm really interested or a part of this community. Nothing could be further from the truth.
So I think we only have time for one more question. I'm sorry. What is the biggest legal access issue that Latina women face today or will face in the near future?
There are so many. It's just like my brain went, and the evictions and special. The number one reason that people who do come to legal aid is domestic violence. That's the number one issue. I'm not saying it's because people don't really know to come for other reasons necessarily. They may not be coming, but it's the one that's at our feet. That's the one knocking on our door. And then, again, that's kind of a cascading. But the number one current issue nationally is really this issue of evictions. And really, it's such a problem because it leads obviously to homelessness, and it leads to so many other problems for those families. So those are the two. I'll just call out those two.
No, I agree. I think right now it's housing. Housing is the biggest barrier to, if you have a place where you can lay your head at night, the issue of employment, of your children staying with you, of being able to flee your abuser, those are the ones that will come and are secondary and tertiary. But you have a place, you need a place to call home, and so many of our clients do not. It is more than you can imagine in terms of the fear, the anxiety, and the inability to call a place home is really hurting our community. We see more Latinas coming to our doorsteps through our Stay House program because they lack housing. They're in fear. I mean, women are allowing their landlords to sexually harass them because they don't want to lose the apartment. And that is one of the biggest issues and barriers that Latinas face, at least here in Los Angeles. It is horrible. And that's why outreach and getting to folks, working with them is so important. It is. So I agree 100% with Betty. They're so intertwined, housing and frankly, domestic violence and sexual harassment.
And I think both of those have to do with economic instability, right? So that becomes important. I was at an event yesterday in Pasadena where someone who was involved with the LA County Homeless Center in downtown, I forgot the name of it, the LA Women's Center, actually. It was the
Downtown
Homeless
Women's
Center. She said that the largest intake that they've been getting recently are widows. So older women who are experiencing homelessness. So, yep.
Thank you. I want you to join me in thanking our fabulous panelists. And I didn't say that, obviously, I didn't read their full bios at the beginning because we would have been here the whole time, just me reading their bios, but their bios are available in the program materials. And I also want to wish Luz a happy birthday.
Happy birthday. Happy birthday.
And she's